Welcome to the How of Business with your host, Henry Lopez, the podcast that helps you start, run, and grow your small business. And now, here is your host.
This is Henry Lopez. Welcome to this episode of the How of Business. My guest today is Zach Beutler. Zach, welcome to the show.
Hey, it's great to be here, Henry.
Today, Zach Beutler has joined me. He's a seasoned entrepreneur and a franchising expert. And Zach brings a deep perspective on what it takes to be successful in franchising, but just in business in general. And so in this conversation, we're going to deep dive into his entrepreneurial journey. We'll talk about that briefly, what from his perspective makes for a great franchise and a great franchisee, and then the story of the franchise that he's part of today, which is Jungle Driving School. I'm going to give a quick thanks to Giuseppe Grammatico, my partner and trusted friend, the franchise guide who connected Zach and I. So thanks, Giuseppe. You can find all of the information about the How of Business resources, the show notes page for this episode, and information on my one-on-one and group coaching programs at thehowofbusiness.com. I also invite you to please consider supporting this show on Patreon and subscribe wherever you might be listening so you don't miss any new episodes. Let me tell you a little bit more about Zach. Zach's full name is Zachary Michael Beutler, and he's a seasoned entrepreneur, a franchising expert, a cattleman, and he lives with his family in Pender, Nebraska. He has built a diverse career spanning business development, franchising, and agriculture. Zachary has played a pivotal role in scaling and investing in franchise concepts, helping business owners achieve sustainable growth. He has either owned, operated, or consulted with 20 plus franchise concepts and awarded over 3,000 territories across the country. He's a recognized thought leader, as you might expect, in franchising. Zach has been featured in Entrepreneur, Franchise Times, PR Newswire, and Startup Nation, where he has shared insights on scaling a business, overcoming challenges, and disrupting the franchise industry. Once again, Zach Beutler, welcome to the show.
It is 100% my pleasure, Henry. Thanks for having me.
Yep, absolutely. So I always like to get the story, how you got to where you are today. Looking at your history on LinkedIn, you've done a lot of different things, but take me back to the early days. Did you go to university, or tell me about those days back when?
You know, I went to a small town. I graduated with 26 kids. I went to school in Lincoln, Nebraska, and I went to community college. And that was the college life was not so much about education for me. And when I was 18, I was walking through the mall, and I walked by a nutrition store, and I saw he was my now brother-in-law, the gentleman who was dating my sister at the time that they ended up getting married, but he was sitting there in this store that just opened. So I went in and talked, and it was a nutrition store. And the first thing he said is that there was another gentleman standing next to him, which was his brother. He said, "You should hire Zach." And that kind of led to me becoming a part-time associate while I was going to school at a nutrition concept. That the story behind them was the gentleman that had the top grossing GNCs in the country sold them and started a competitor. Nice. And right when they opened, right place, right time, I kind of walked in and got a part-time job. And 2 weeks later, everybody in the store quit, and I became the manager by default.
Wow.
And I thought, well, I can help out more, give more hours. And then I saw how much the managers were making, and it was like $80,000 or something crazy. And I was like, I'm the manager until you find somebody else. And so I kind of, I wouldn't say stop going to class, but I basically did. And I worked open to close, and the store had one of its best months ever. And that kind of led me down the path where I was like, this is what I'm supposed to be doing. And they started franchising, and I went to the founder of that business, and I think at that time, which been a couple of years later, I think I might have had 20 grand saved.
Wow.
And I said, "Hey, would you?" I had this big presentation, and I was like, "If I was a franchisee, I'd make this much money for you versus this." And within like 30 seconds, he's like, "I'm in. Let's do it." And so the founder actually co-signed an SBA loan.
Really?
I moved to Tallahassee, Florida. Didn't know a soul, and opened my first franchise at 21 years old. And it was a delightful experience. I did, I think, over $1 million the first year open. And then within 30 months, I had 6 additional locations. So I had 7 locations in operation, on the path to doing $8 million in revenue. And I remember we had these big buy one, get one free sales. And it was like I'm feeling like I was on top of the water. And then Amazon came out with e-commerce. and then bodybuilding.com started doing it. And it took us about 2 years to realize that we would exhaust our new customer base for weight loss
I see.
segment. And it really struggled. I mean, I ended up losing everything, filed bankruptcy, rock bottom.
Wow.
And that was 23 or 4, I think. And there was another
Jeez.
franchisee at the time that had 12, 13 locations. And I remember trying to figure out a way to partner with them. And it ended up working out where I got some equity and some future growth. And we took that from a handful of stores to 68 locations and over 40 million in revenue in 3 years.
That was a different concept. I lost you there for a moment.
Same concept, different,
Same.
but with just a different owner. And,
I see.
we had a different way of kind of building the locations. And it was, I did that for almost a decade. That lived that retail life. And I got a lot of crash course of experience in business
Unbelievable.
on managing different things and having to refocus our core service line. And that was one of the best. I learned more in that 10 years than I feel like some people do in a
Well, you had to
lifetime.
learn it inside and out, and then and had the major failure early on. You had to recover from that. So much in that 10-year period. I want to go back. Did you think you were going to be a business owner when you were younger?
I did. So I grew up in a family business. My grandpa bought a livestock auction barn in 1969. And, I grew up where my dad took over that, worked in that business when he was 18. And my dad now runs it. And I actually have another office that I office out of that building in 2 days a week. And so I grew up in a family business where that's kind of, that's the only thing that we really knew.
Yeah.
And so, that, I don't know if I really, when I was 18 or 19, I really thought about
Hmm.
when I went to college owning a business per se. But looking back, I was looking for things that led me to that path. Just
Right.
that's how I grew up.
That failure that you had so early, that can take two people two different ways. One is, okay, I'll never touching business again. It doesn't work for me. I'll go get a job. That's not the impact it had on you. Why is that?
I can remember, I being pretty down and in the dumps, and I was drinking a lot. It was rock bottom. I mean, I had nothing left, and I remember I read this book, and I can't remember where I got it or who recommended it to me. It was called The Success Principles by Jack Canfield. And this book revolutionized my entire life. Like so it talks about manifesting your destiny. And I have a vision board that I do every year. It's literally right by my desk.
Fantastic.
Uh, and but one of the first things it talks about is taking responsibility for where you are in your life, today. And I thought about that where you know, you can sit there and blame this person for that and that person for this, but at the end of the day, you are where you are, and the only
Mhm.
one you have to blame is really yourself.
Yeah, I mean, you could have easily said, "Well, Amazon killed us all, and there's nothing I can do. That was just what it is. It wasn't my fault."
And so I think I was determined, and from that point to do something great, which I feel still like I'm determined. But since then, I have felt like I'm behind. If that makes sense. I feel like I'm
Interesting.
behind, and so I'm always trying to play catch up with. I feel like I'm behind with my personal development. I'm always trying to absorb more and learn more because and the way I explain it in my EO group, which is interesting, I say there's this island of my perfect life that I would like to, that I know I need to swim to. That's
Hmm.
where I have to be, and I have to make that swim eventually. But if I made it today, I drown because I'm not good enough to swim that far. So I got to prepare myself for that journey. And I've always kind of felt like since that event, I've been in that position.
Just playing off of that analogy and that thought, though, have you though learned to appreciate the achievements along the way and to enjoy the journey there?
Celebrating is not something that I do enough of, to just be transparent. I definitely need to do a better job of that. But what I have realized is that the destination is not what makes you happy. It is the journey to the destination.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so, the amount of money, it's not about how much money you make. It's, not about the achievement, but where I really find enjoyment is the process of getting to
Hmm.
the goal of the destination.
Yeah, and I think I've also found that it's this opportunity that we have, that we get to do this, right? That we have chosen to be able to do this, and you see it, of course, as a franchisor and how you are empowering others to achieve their success.
It's a different feeling. Being able to help someone that is looking to take that leap themselves is a different type of feeling that you get, and it's hard to describe, but it's very rewarding. And being on. So at this point in my life, I've been one of the first franchisees of concept, multi-unit, failed franchisee, rebuilt franchisee, franchise development consultant, franchisor. I've been on so many different sides of the table that you learn a lot of what not to do. But you also you realize that it's a people business, and you're dealing with more than just dollars and cents and contracts. It's a people business.
Mm-hmm. All right. So obviously you've been in it your entire life, this franchise business model, but what do you tell people as to what you like about and what they should consider are the strengths of the franchise business model, as opposed to, of course, the option of building my own, as opposed to buying an existing or opening a new unit of a franchise?
100%. So I have other businesses where we have a beefy commerce business, for example,
Right.
where we had to build, you know, everything from the CRM
Mm-hmm.
to the website, the processes, the relationships, and it was a nightmare. And we have our Angus business where we had to do a lot of the same stuff. To be able to bypass a lot of the tactical to-dos that really just let you get started and enjoy the journey. I think a lot of people overlooked how many things are built for you, from the branding, the systems, the CRMs, and having that support of somebody that's been in the industry that knows where to help, where you're going to struggle. Those things are so overlooked.
Yeah. My first business was a franchise back in 91. And then, about 10 years later, I thought, okay, I got this. I know how to do this. I want to build my own. And so I did that. And then I've come full circle to now when I look at opportunities, and if you would have asked me, 10 years ago, I said, no, I don't want to do a franchise. I don't want to pay the price for that. But I've come to understand that even with the experience I have, and if the franchise is right, there are certain components that I wouldn't even be able to build if I wanted to. I'll give you an example. I'm a minority owner in a franchise now called Office Evolution, a shared office space. And just the call center function alone that they offer, there's no way that I could build that as a standalone. And that's just a simple little example where I've come to appreciate that even for a more experienced entrepreneur like I think I am, there is a lot of that's compelling about the franchise model versus build it your own.
It's interesting. There's different questions that people ask based on how many businesses they've built.
Mm,
Someone that has never built a business really asks questions about, oh, is this going to work? Is there too much competition? Their fear is different. People that have bought and sold a business, when they've done that at least once, their questions gear more towards, all right, how do I get customers? And walk me through, like, what's the day in the life going to look like, and
hmm
where am I going to have the stress at? Because they know that it's going to be there. Where the people that have never owned a business, they think it's more sunshine and rainbows all the time.
hmm
And then you'll talk to the people that have done it multiple times, and they don't care about any of the other stuff. They
hmm
can find that other stuff so quickly. They want time investment, time return, scalability, simplicity,
Right.
duplicate. They want to make sure that, hey, I want little time, I want great return, I want proven processes. It's a completely different Q&A based on their level of experience.
Yeah, that makes sense. Leverage and scale is kind of what you start to look at. All right, the flip side of it, the question I like to ask is, who is a franchise typically generalizing not a fit for? So, what type of person, if we're generalizing, is it usually not a good fit for?
Pessimistic, combative personalities. It's a partnership. And I think a lot of times, if you're not an optimistic person, you're constantly finding things that are wrong versus looking for opportunities. And a franchisor isn't going to run your business for you. They're there to provide you tools, expertise, and advantages to build your business faster and easier. And I have a hard time in franchising, even working with people that are more pessimistic, that there's always an issue, it can't be done. And when you think about that person, they probably shouldn't own a business anyways.
Right.
So that I think that's the first. That's the first of who it's
hmm
not a fit for. Now, there are people that are truly entrepreneurs that they look at it and go, "There's too much. I'm giving you too much control."
Right.
But I am that person. But
Yeah,
when I
so am
looked at
I.
it, there's still a lot of, like, once you realize, well, what they're doing, and there's advantages there. So I
hmm
think the first thing is that we've had a lot of a lot of frustration and a lot of things that didn't work with people's personalities that were combative and pessimistic. And that's
Yep,
why
I
the
can see that.
front part of our process is so dialed into where we're
Hmm.
trying to weed out those people to where, hey, if they don't want to follow our process and they want to be combative with certain things, it's like, hey, this relationship is just not going to be healthy.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, that ties to, I know for myself, back when I was in that period of time where I would not have done a franchise, I didn't want to be told what to do, right? I thought, well, that's the why I was the boss. I don't want to have rules and regulations and things I can do. I want to add something to the menu if I want to. So it's got to be someone who is willing to take the recipe and execute on it, right? And not try to continuously reinvent the wheel. That doesn't mean that you don't have feedback, but you got to either buy in or not. Is that fair?
Well, yes and no. So there's a problem that I have with kind of how you said that, because I'm a big believer that great franchisors work with franchisees to adjust the recipe.
Over time and collectively. Is that fair?
Right. Well,
Yeah.
so when a franchise, so mine, this newest concept, we're starting from the ground up, like we've done many others. We're gonna build this brand with the help of franchisees, and there's going to be things that change that come from the franchisees.
Hmm.
Unless you have 1,000 locations, you do not have a proven recipe.
Hmm.
It doesn't work everywhere. It doesn't work with every personality, and it has to be able to adjust. And so the one thing that is a little bit of, just kind of irks me is when I hear franchisors talk about, well, that person didn't work because they didn't follow the process. I always go to,
Hmm.
their process really working well? I mean, if it worked so well, why didn't they just follow it?
Hmm.
And I think where a lot of conflict happens is that a franchisor is mandating something that isn't working, and the franchisee knows it's not working and isn't willing to do it. And that creates this, you don't care about my results, you just want money. And they're like, you don't want to follow the process. I think
Yeah,
that there's got to be some give and take there.
that makes sense. That makes sense. All right, so tell me about Jungle Driving School. And I wasn't clear. Is this a brand that you founded?
I found this brand and the owner, and then did an acquisition and partnered with them to launch it as a
I
franchise.
see. Got it. Got it. So when did that happen? When did you start with them and take this over?
So we first talked towards the end of 2023, and the phone call went like this. Well, I got text messages say, "Are you looking for more brands?" And I said, "I am." And
So
what
they
they said,
reached out to you initially.
it was a retired franchise consultant actually texted me and said, "Hey, are
Mm-hmm.
you still looking for franchise concepts?" I said, "I
Mm-hmm.
am." Because I have a teen driving concept. What do you think? I go, I just remember going, "Hi." I said, "I'll take the call, sure." And the first 30 seconds when Fred Westdale was like, "Hey, my name's Fred. We started over 20 years ago, and
Wow.
my previous partner built a driver safety program for one of the world's largest package delivery service companies, and lowered accidents by 70%. And then we started this school, and I was just thinking like, that's a really good story. And then as I got into the industry, it's the most fragmented industry that I've been a part of, and that's saying something. When I've been in the tree business, dumpster rentals, I've been in
Mm-hmm.
a lot of the fragmented industries, and the more I got into it, the more things that I knew that caused frustration in the past with brands this didn't have. And in November of last year, we got a deal done where I got the acquisition completed, and we launched franchising here last month, and we're having our first discovery day here in 2 weeks.
Wow, how exciting. Didn't realize that there was that early in the days. You touched on something going back to the conversation we had about the recipe. That's something I always find so frustrating is I see franchisors might have one or two, maybe not even that successful locations and they're already franchising, right? That's kind of been part of what appealed to you. These guys had really done something here to develop this 20 years, a methodology behind it. So that has to have been part of what influenced you, I believe. Yes.
So I look at most businesses, there's customer acquisition strategies that are digital,
Hmm.
they're all very similar. And so once you have vendors and you have done that across multiple brands, you have a good idea of what industries are going to be competitive and which ones aren't. And then you look at where you're going to find your employee base. With this brand, uh, gosh, they had such a unique experience that they provided to the teenager, and I have not seen that anywhere else in this entire industry.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so
And
that's
very
where I
niched
really,
and a very important focus, obviously, for the teen market. And they have developed a way to teach teens how to drive safely. I'm gathering. Yeah.
it was hilarious, Henry. I went up to when I was interested enough, I went and visited up there, and I did a ride along, and when I was driving around, the young gal driving said, "Gosh, there's a hyena on my butt," and I thought, what? I'm looking back like, what is she talking about? And then Fred said, "Okay, now watch out. There's a crocodile coming up here." And after the drive, I was like, "Fred, what? First of all, what's a hyena?" He said, "Well, Zach, hyenas are the worst drivers on the road. They butt sniff all the other cars, and they have road rage. You don't want to be one of them." And then I said, "Okay, what's a crocodile?" And he goes, "Well, those are cars getting ready to pull out of a parking lot where if you're not careful, they'll drag you to your death." And I just thought, they've used this unique way to help teens identify risk before there's catastrophe that I just haven't seen.
That's fantastic. Okay, so now from that perspective, the jungle driving school perspective, I know it's early days, but you've done this enough to know what's going to make for an ideal franchisee at a high level. Some of the things that we've talked about already, but what are you looking for?
So one of the first things I'm looking for is tactical grit, as I call it.
Tactical grit.
Tactical grit. So, there's a lot. So when I've had plenty of low performer calls. And the first thing I go to is, okay, did the arts ends get put out? Okay, did you join the chamber? Did you attend the BNI groups? Did you do all this stuff that's effort based? And did you do it well? And, there's been very few times where that low performer did those things, so we're looking for someone that wants to get out and wants to build the business in the community, that, wants to get out there and make a difference. Like that's the tactical aspect, is that, they're willing to do the art signs and those type of things are just like, yep, check the box. I need to go out and do those things, which, gosh, I don't want to do that. That's below me, or that's not something I'm comfortable with, or
yeah.
So that's the first part. And then the second one is, for this brand, it is an experience. And so regardless if they're going to be managing the manager or in the business, they have to be outgoing, likable, and they got to have the energy to give the kids an experience that is going to be well received.
Yeah, that's what it's going to take. I want to go back to the tactical grit thing because that's such a common thing. I always say the business is out there, not here behind the computer at the desk, right, where we have a tendency to stay. You got to go out there and get the business. You got to get in the community. You've got to do all of those things. Otherwise, the business is not just going to come to you because you have a pretty website. And I think that's critical for people to be successful in any business, but certainly you're saying in this type of franchise.
I'm a big believer in that. We've actually built an entire system around, around measuring and monitoring those type of things. So there's a result that we can measure, which is, let's call it new customers. There's activities that we know lead to new customers, and then there's the effort of those activities. And so we've got an entire tech platform built around measuring and monitoring the effort of the activity that produces the result, called milestones.
That's wonderful. Excellent. This is Henry Lopez with a quick message about our show sponsor and trusted service partner, The Franchise Guide. Giuseppe Grammatico is the Franchise Guide, and he provides expert consultation services to help you find the right franchise small business. If you are considering a franchise business, I recommend consulting The Franchise Guide. Giuseppe is a franchise veteran who simplifies the process of franchising and excels at guiding his clients to the franchise model that best suits them. He helps people like you find flexibility and freedom in their lives through franchise business ownership. And as your guide, he will help you answer any of your questions about franchises. Once he gets to know you and what you're looking for, he creates your own personalized model and shows you which franchise opportunities are a best match for your needs and preferences. The best part? It's all free. There's no catch. Like with real estate or business brokers, Giuseppe's fees are paid by the franchise company. So if you're interested in a franchise business, take the first step and schedule a free, no obligation call with Giuseppe. To learn more and to schedule your consultation with the Franchise Guide, please go to the show notes page for this episode at thehowofbusiness.com. There's also a link to the show notes page in the description of this episode. All right, you when I had asked you questions that might be good to ask, you mentioned managing data, activities and efforts, which I think is what we talked about now, right? That's what you meant by that. But the managing data part, what do you see there that's critical, or that sometimes maybe business owners miss?
Well, in my past, we would have, we had, in the retail days, we had 200 and some employees, for an example, and we had a ranker that would basically weight certain KPIs and activities based on how we would like the businesses to be managed. And, that was for longevity, service, profitability. And that we learned a ton where you can measure the wrong thing and swing the pendulum too far in a way where you ruin the experience and retention. But we first went through the employees so we could really rank employees where we could provide specific training on specific things. And then we did that obviously with the locations where each location would have a rank and we'd rank them top to bottom. And that allowed us to, as we did it over time, to realize that there's results and there's the activities that create the results. And then there's the effort of the activities that if we can get that granular with our measurements and we're confident with our activities, we can really, I don't like to say micromanage the effort, but we can really make sure that a system is put in place to where we can bring someone new and know exactly what to do and how to do it.
Mm-hmm. And like you said, if what you're telling me is you've got a system that helps me track that, then that's got to act as a tremendous motivator for me to continue doing all of the work that leads to those results, right? You're helping people see that connection.
I think sometimes, in franchising, people aren't quite sure what all the things that they can go do. So if we have these milestones, and it's almost like a video game where you get into it, and to get to the next level, you have to complete these milestones, then it unlocks another, a whole other level of activities.
Mm-hmm.
It always leads you down the path of things that we know and believe that build a better business.
Yeah.
From getting more Google reviews and putting out yard signs the correct way and soliciting interviews and feedback from customers. There's a ton of the milestones that we've created, and to gamify that, we've actually created a way where they earn points based on achieving those milestones that they can use for different.
Love that. Yeah, love that. I think this speaks back to what we were talking about earlier, that I have also observed a misconception that as well, it's a franchise, so I just got to open it, Bloom, plug in all their stuff in their systems and follow the rules and all that. All of a sudden it happens magically, right? And they don't think about that. Well, it's still going to take my effort, my incredible effort, or as you put it, my tactical grit to get out there and build this business. You also talk about urgency a lot, urgency in the business culture. What do you mean by that? Give me an example of what that should look like.
Gosh, I think something that I could probably use some more patience, but when there's things that can move the needle immediately, they're the employees that seem in a company that seem to rise to the top have this different perception of time.
Mm-hmm.
They look at it and go, I can do this crash course ramrod now and I can get so much results versus an employee that says, well, it's not efficient enough or, that's not repeatable. And, by the time that they figure out how to make that repeatable, someone else has already done it the hard way and moved on to the next thing.
Right.
And really move the needle on performance. And so for a franchisee, you have to have urgency that, not that you're behind per se, but things are always changing. There was a guy that used to work for me that I really liked, and he said, somebody's always out to eat your lunch. You need to make sure you eat theirs first. And I thought that was a great analogy.
Oh, I can see where it applies so directly to your early experiences with Amazon eating your lunch, if you will. And so you learned early on that in business, if we stay stagnant, we are dying, right?
Exactly.
And I think it also, the principle that applies here is that I have a tendency to do this as a perfectionist, to get everything to 100%, but the time invested there is diminishing returns, right? And it's keeping me from moving forward on something else, perhaps.
Well, gosh, there's Gary Vaynerchuk, says that on content, people want to have it professionally produced and edit it. And he goes, you should just push it out raw on
Put
your
it out.
phone. And
Yep.
I think there's people that fail to execute because they're waiting for the right time or the right opportunity. And I'm a big believer that making the wrong decision is still better than making no decision. By being able to pivot when you know you've made the wrong decision is where experience comes in.
Yeah. Well, it also speaks to what you're talking about, building this franchise now collectively with your franchisees, especially in these early days. One of the things I'm curious to your thoughts since you brought it up on pivoting, because I've talked about this a lot on the show. The thing that's so hard for a small business owner on to pivot is was that sunk cost theory, right? Where I invested all of this. I was convinced it was going to work. So if I just keep working at it, if I keep putting in a bit more of my savings, I'll get there. What do you advise to people who go down that path for all obvious reasons? What do you say to them to think about it differently?
That's a great question. So I would say beware of marketers because
Of
they're always the
marketers.
best. They're always the best at everything. The only way to hold them accountable is it depends. The only way it works is if you keep spending more money. You'll hear that
Yes.
from about everything. And there's only one marketing guy that I trust with my life, my wife, my money, and my kids, and that I actually do refer out. And so, I think there's got to be when you go into like a new campaign, you have to have clear, determined measurables of where you need to be for the cost, and know when to pull the plug. And I lived that life personally, where when we started, radio
Right.
ruled the world. We would spend $10,000 a
Mhm.
month on radio, open a location, and I mean, it was Henry, it was easy. When I say it was easy, I
Mhm.
turned it on and I just wait in the store and we'd have customers. I mean, it was that easy. And then all of a sudden it wasn't. And we tried spending more and then changing the campaigns, and it just we what we failed to realize is that we had exhausted that new customer, where we weren't getting them back without some type of new product or a discount. And so we that really led to my downfall, where that I went down that path too far and couldn't come back.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, and that happens. I see it happen now. Most recently, I have a client in a particular space where Facebook ads were working 2 years ago, and now they're just not, right? So things continue to evolve. But I want to wrap it up here with this because I want to go back to that. When you went through that failure early on, I got to think that part of it, and part of the reason I might have kept at it and at it and at it until I was forced to close the doors, is my ego, the admission of failure, the having to tell my friends and family, oh yeah, I know I was doing fantastic, but I had to shut it all down. Did you have to overcome that, or was it already in your personality that that really wasn't as important? Tell me about how that felt, and did that delay you making the pivot?
I don't know if I've actually thought about it that way. I think absolutely there's, having success your whole life until you don't is a really strange feeling to deal with. What experience has taught me now, if I could have went back, I would have severed some of my locations at a much faster pace from a
Sooner. So you
capital
might have shut
perspective,
down some down even sooner if you'd go back.
much sooner. And then uh, there would have been other ways that I could have, had a manager take over and sign it off to
Hmm.
them, and as an
Hmm.
owner operator, it would have worked. And there's could have been some things that I could have done, but and this is, I think, true in entrepreneurship. I mean, I believed, right? Like, yeah, I had such strong belief that it was going to turn around,
Right.
where I was ignoring the signs that it really wasn't. And
Right.
having thank goodness I've actually lived that, had to gone through it to teach me
Right.
that not to do that again. I wish I could just obviously read the book and not to go through the hard lesson all the time myself. But
Right. But then sometimes that's what we have to do, right? We have to learn these lessons sometimes ourselves. But I think that is another advantage of going with the right franchisor, is that's one of the things they're helping us do, avoid some of those obvious mistakes, right?
I mean, yeah, you think
And
about joining a franchisor that's never had failure and that's never had to struggle. Like, there's going to be a different relationship when things are good and when things are
agreed.
bad.
Agreed.
And so you got to make sure that who you're pitching your wagon to can weather the storm.
Yeah. All right. So what's on the horizon here? Obviously a lot of growth, but what's on the horizon for Jungle Driving School? What's next?
All of the brands that I have built, Henry, have had some fairly aggressive growth. And so this is the first brand that I have built where I've assembled a fairly large team in the beginning that has built multiple franchise brands from the ground up at an aggressive pace. So the level of technology that we have, the systems and some of the things that we've got built for franchisees at a really early level.
Hmm.
This would be the first brand that we've done that with. So I'm really excited. I think we're positioned right now to have quite a few placements. We have our first discovery day coming up in a couple of weeks, and we're going to rock and roll.
And are you offering franchises nationwide or in certain regions right now? What's the story
We're
there?
nationwide except for what we call the four problem states in franchising: California, New York, Maryland, and Washington.
Right. I got it. Understood. All right. One other question for you. You certainly for some time and certainly now juggle very distinctly different businesses. How do you manage Just the allocation of focus, in addition to being a father and a husband and a family member and all of that. How do you strike a balance there? And balance isn't the right word. How do you allocate time for each of them at the right levels?
Yeah, I think it's there's a word called intention that I'm a big believer in is how are you intentional where you spend your time? And so this is my main focus. This is, what I believe, they say keeps the lights on. So this is where we're focused. My cattle business, when I grow that business and as it scales, there's a very much a time sensitive component where
I see.
a lot of the things that we have are very focused on how much time is this going to take? Is this built to maximize the amount of time, and can someone step in and do this without having to have myself there?
Right.
And so we've really dialed that into where I get to work on that when I want to work on it, which is the benefits of being a business owner, and then it doesn't take away from the family time, which is the most important.
Your kids are high school range, middle school range. What age range?
My kids are young. Brixton will be 5 here next
Oh,
month.
wow, really young.
In July, and then Riot, my youngest, he'll be 2, 3 in August.
Do you think you'll influence them to be entrepreneurs?
I don't think it was ever my family, my grandpa or my dad's intention to influence me. I just think, you see the benefit if you grow up in it.
Yeah, they modeled it for you, certainly.
I still remember my first job working, I think I was 8 or 9. It was like an 11-hour day washing hog pens out, and I didn't get paid.
Oh, God.
And I remember thinking, I need to go get a job.
A real job.
But you obviously hope your kids do better than you do as a father. And I think I hope that they get good life experience working in the business that lets them be happy and successful.
Yep. Well said. All right. You mentioned the success principles. So that's a great book recommendation. Is there another book that comes to mind, or is that the one you were thinking you were going to recommend?
I'm a big believer in reading for intention. So I like, from a sales perspective, there's a book called The Ultimate Sales Machine that I think is fantastic. That's a great book for systems and processes and management traction. But Gino Wickman's fantastic. There's How to Win Friends and Influence People that I just started up again today. Actually,
Did
reading
you?
it.
Yeah.
That's like that's the one you probably should read every month, probably. But
Agreed. Yep. Well, good. These are great suggestions. Traction is a great one. I've had the privilege of having Gino Wickman on the show. The Ultimate Sales Machine I haven't read, so I'm going to put that on the list. I'll have these listed on the show notes page for this episode at thehowofbusiness.com. Let's wrap it up here. Zach, what's one thing you want us to take away from this conversation in the context of, a franchise, considering a franchise? Listening is either somebody like myself, who's an existing business owner that might look at a franchise to add to my portfolio or to do something next, or somebody who might be in the corporate world is looking at starting a business. A franchise is always a great option. But what's one thing you want us to take away from the conversation that we had?
You're looking at I think a lot of times people struggle on which franchise is the best. And I'm a big believer that if you're a higher performer, you're going to have success where you land. And, the 3 things that you need to be able to ask yourself is, number 1, do you believe the industry itself makes money? Number 2, do you believe that the franchisor is going to do everything in their reasonable power to support you to be successful? And the last is, if you look yourself in the mirror, do you see yourself doing that business or running that business every day? And if you can say yes to those 3 things, I think you got a great match.
Excellent. Where do you want us to go online to learn more?
Go to jungledriving.com.
Jungledriving.com. We'll have a link to that on the show notes page as well at thehowofbusiness.com. Zach, thanks so much for being on the show today, taking your time, sharing of your experiences, being so forthcoming with everything you experience, your failures, your great successes, and now this tremendous opportunity with Jungle Driving School. Thanks for being with me today.
Again, 100% my pleasure, Henry.
This is Henry Lopez, and thanks for joining us on this episode of The How of Business. My guest today again is Zach Beutler. I release new episodes every Monday morning. You can find the show anywhere you listen to podcasts, including the YouTube channel, the How of Business YouTube channel, and my website, thehowofbusiness.com. Thanks again for listening.
Thank you for listening to The How of Business. For more information about our coaching programs, online courses, show notes pages, links, and other resources, please visit thehowofbusiness.com.